In a previous video, I discussed tips, tricks, and ideas on all 10 power-ups at the time in Super Mario Maker 2. However, I didn't talk about 3 different types of shells Mario can wear, being the Shellmet, Spiny Shellmet, and the Drybone Shell. I wanted these 3 items to have a video of their own, so here it is. Today, I'm going to be discussing tips, tricks, and ideas on using these 3 items in your levels in Super Mario Maker 2. These are some of the most helpful items, even if they aren't being worn by Mario. But before we get into that, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as that helped me out a huge bunch, and it'll let you know when I upload my next video. But with that being said, let's jump right into tips, tricks, and ideas on the shells for Super Mario Maker 2. Now, we aren't really going to have an order for these, so we are just going to kind of mix them in with each other. We are going to start more basic and get more complicated as the video goes on. So first off, to talk about how useful these shells can be while Mario isn't actually wearing them. Shells are very helpful since when kicked are able to do many things such as kill enemies, activate on-off switches, break bricks, and activate question mark blocks, and so much more. Shells can enter their motion state by either getting kicked by Mario, bouncing off a spring, or fired out by a Bill Blaster. This means these shells can be used in several setups. Here they can be used to turn on and off these on-off switches to make trickier time parkour. Here they can be used in a timer setup so a player has to survive until the shell gets them a key. And here they'll have to activate a question mark block with a vine inside so the player can progress. Shells are so unbelievably useful for activating things and being used as signals, and since these are able to be placed down in their shell state, these are usually better than Koopa shells. This is one of the main reasons contraptions are harder to make in 3D World, since they don't have the placeable shells. Luckily, spike balls help a little bit, but the shells are still best. Now let's go over some tips on using these shells when Mario is wearing them. First off, let's go over a good Shellmet dispenser. What do I mean by this? Well, since Mario is able to carry shells in most themes, he's technically able to have 2 of them. However, a lot of the times you don't want this, as this might lead to cheese. So here's the setup for a Shellmet dispenser where the player will only ever be able to get 1. Having the Shellmet land on any semi-solid surface with a one-way will allow the player to be able to get a helmet but not carry it. The setup is also good if you want the player to have multiple tries. There is a catch, as this unfortunately only works in Mario 1 and 3. It used to work in all themes in Mario Maker 1, but this was changed for some reason. However, it can work in the other themes if Mario has a mushroom. While wearing a Shellmet, if Mario jumps into a saw, he'll actually fly away from the saw based on how he hit it. You can use this in 2 ways. Either Mario has to use the saws to his advantage, or he has to avoid them. First, let's take a look at using them for his advantage. Jumping into saws can allow Mario to change his momentum very quickly, so you can make a jump like this where it may seem like it'd have to be a very hard wraparound. However, it can be easily made if Mario jumps into the saw. I'm sure there are more ways to use this to your advantage, but a jump setup like this is the easiest to see, and it's also actually pretty fun to pull off. As for using them against Mario, you can place them in the way of jumps, and if Mario touches them, he gets slammed into the void. These can be made surprisingly tight. I'm working on a level right now about these shells, which is partially the reason I made this video, but I was super surprised with how tight these can be made. Alright, we haven't really given a fact about the Drybone Shell yet, so let's do that. But before we do, since this is the Drybone Shell, I must remind you all that Drybones is the best candidate for DLC for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Vote Drybones. But anyways, in this level, Mario can't leave the ground, and he's come face to face with a jump, which would normally be no problem to him. However, like I said, he isn't able to leave the ground if he wants to beat the level. However, he notices that there's an on-off switch above him, which may help him in this predicament. Using the conveniently placed spring, he's able to activate the on-off switch, which creates a path for Mario over the gap. So what's going on here? Basically, a spring is on top of a dotted line block, which is on top of a Drybone shell. Since these shells float, it will attempt to rise to the surface, made quicker by this slope here, thus activating invisible blocks which will allow Mario to pass. Normally, Drybone shells will break once they hit a surface, but this setup allows them to hit these invisible blocks and then get destroyed when it's done. This will work in all liquids. In fact, it's super easy to see what happens when it's in water, so take a look. This is the only shell that floats, which makes it a unique setup to the Drybone shell. Also, this cage that gets turned on and off is optional. Using the normal shellmet, you are able to knock around enemies if they land on you, or if you jump into them. This can be helpful in a number of setups. For example, here, Mario is trapped in a room where an on-off block is needed to be activated to continue. Mario sees there's an on-off block above him, however he can't reach it. There's a spike ball up there, however it seems to be having trouble getting to the switch. However, using his shellmet, Mario is able to boost the Munchers up and allow the spike ball to pass and finally hit the switch. The setup can be very customizable. These Munchers can be used to raise up the spike ball, make it go across gaps, and even reverse its direction. You can also change what item is being sent across, like maybe it could be a Koopa to activate a note block or a dry bone shell. You can also knock Munchers upwards to say activate a P-switch. In the setup here, you're going to want to only hit the Muncher that will turn off the dotted line blocks. If you hit another Muncher, it will activate a P-switch, causing you to die. Looking at the top, you're able to see which one, and you have to carefully align yourself with the correct position before jumping. Munchers and helmets can be used in a whole bunch of different contraptions, and these were just a few examples of how they can be combined, so I suggest experimenting with the Muncher-Shellmet combination. Next up, Mario has found himself in a boss fight with Bowser. Since the spiny Shellmet is able to damage enemies, Mario actually does have a chance to defeat Bowser. At each side of the room, there's a small gap in the ceiling so Mario can hit Bowser. However, to make sure this boss fight isn't too easy, bullet bills are flying towards Mario. However, after 8 hits of his helmet, he's able to make it out. This is another pretty simple thing that can be easily customized. Boom Boom also works with this along with the Big Bowser, and you could also change what enemies Mario has to deal with while trying to fight Bowser. For example, maybe spike balls could be constantly rolling towards Mario instead of bullet bills. If Mario loses his shellmet, then he loses the fight. However, you could always have a reset door to get a new helmet if he fails, with the only downside being Mario would have to restart the fight. Next up we have gates that you will only be able to pass through if you have the right shell equipped. Since each one of these shells have different properties, we can use these to make these detectors. For the shellmet, we can use the boosting of Munchers, like we mentioned earlier. Since spiny shellmets will kill Munchers, you need a normal shellmet in order to boost the Muncher into the P-switch to open the P-switch door. For the spiny shellmet gate, all you have to do is simply break hard blocks by jumping into them. Finally, the dry bone shell could have a setup like this, where you have to play dead past the saws. Then jump over a high cliff, and then get your shell back. This can maybe be used in a level where you have to go back to the same spot, but you have a different item so you are able to open up new paths. I used this shellmet gate to make sure that the player kept their shellmet through a tricky saw parkour section in my level, that way they didn't cheese it by just losing the shellmet. Next up, we've got a mini boss using the dry bone shell. Now something I didn't know before making this video, but if you play dead, thwomps actually won't activate. So I made a boss fight around this mechanic. Mario has found himself in a small space with thwomps at the top. However, if a thwomp ever gets activated, they'll land on the on-off switches, causing Mario to die. What Mario needs to do is play dead at the right time, which is a test of the player's rhythm skills. Eventually, the timer at the side will expire, allowing Mario to leave. The setup here is pretty basic and again can be made harder or easier by adding thwomps or making the track longer or shorter. As a bonus, I used a shell timer here as well, which is extremely simple. I used a dry bone shell as that makes the timer longer, but you could just use a normal shellmet if you wanted to go faster. Now one tricky part of this fight is the player may be confused as to what to do to survive. So I suggest making this the entrance to your fight. They have to enter the dead state in order to pass, and while in that state they'll notice the thwomp above them isn't activating. That way they'll know how to survive the boss. It's subtle, but it's always very important to convey to the player what they're supposed to be doing, especially if it's an obscure mechanic like this. Sure, part of it could be trying to solve the puzzle, but maybe it's better if you just have the execution be what the challenge is. But anyways, that's it for this video. There's a ton you can do with shells, and I didn't even mention everything, like how you are able to ride normal shells, or all the shell jumps and things you can do. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and end off the video here. What was your favorite idea, and do you have any of your own? Let me know in the comments. I had a lot of fun working with shells for this video, as there's just so many cool things you can do with them. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more on Super Mario Maker 2. Links to my Twitter, Discord server, and Maker ID are all in the description below if you want to check those out. But anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.